Serenity Journey. We are here to help you with your spiritual awakening. If you are going through a spiritual awakening, we are here to help you let go and change the ideas and beliefs that are holding on to your life and helping you find peace with yourself and live from that place of peace. That's what we do here. Hope that you are excited as I am, as I've been going through this Live Every Day in August challenge that I've been going through. I've been talking about it in some of my previous live streams. One of the things that's helping us do and helping me to do is really defining who I am and what my content's about and what my journey is about. And so that's one of the things that we're working on. And one of the key things that I found is that, really who I'm here to serve and what I'm here to do is talking to people that are going through a difficult spiritual awakening and understanding what that means. Hello, Ms. Amber, Outcountry Sales. Hope you're having a fantastic day. Hope you and Mike are doing well. So we're here talking to people about a spiritual awakening. And I thought today, since we're kind of honing in on the spiritual awakening process, I wanted to talk about what is a spiritual awakening and how to know if you're going through a spiritual awakening or have been through a spiritual awakening. Because I didn't have this. And one of the things that I learned in myself is when I'm doing this kind of content, I'm trying to be the teacher I wish I had. I'm trying to be the person I wish I had to turn to when I went through my spiritual awakening. Because when I went through my spiritual awakening, I was alone. I didn't have a guide. I didn't have a teacher. I didn't have somebody that I could turn to with my questions and with my own self-doubts, and that I could talk to about how I felt like I was going insane at times. Oh, there we go. Move that in just a little bit. And so I decided when I'm going through this, as I'm trying to share more of these ideas with people, what a spiritual awakening is, I thought I would try to get back to the very basics. And how do we know if we've been through a spiritual awakening, or how do we know, are we going crazy? Because there is mental health issues that are not a spiritual awakening. And then there are a lot of things that go with a spiritual awakening that look just like people going crazy and having a mental breakdown. So how do we tell the difference? How do we know it's a true spiritual awakening, or are we losing our mind? Because I know some people that have actually not gone through a spiritual awakening that think they have, because they're just losing some of their mind. Got to have our Christmas cup in August and coffee, because, coffee is how I roll. And so, but I thought today we'd define some of that and talk about some of the signs of a spiritual awakening process. And we're going to be going deeper into the spiritual awakening side of things over the next few weeks, probably. I've got one of the things that I did is I was doing this research on the spiritual awakening, as I came tons of questions that people are looking for to understand the spiritual awakening process, that are questions that I never really thought about. But they're ones that are things that I kind of know some of the answers to. So I'm like, I'm going to start going through that and doing a bunch of stuff on understanding what the spiritual awakening is. In this last year, there's three kind of main ways that we go through a spiritual awakening. One is through trauma. So we might have an intense traumatic experience that kind of causes us to step outside of ourselves. Good morning, Kathy. Hope you're having a fantastic day. And so as we go through this awakening, we might, get out of our own head, out of our own way, and start recognizing the world is not the way we always thought it was. It's kind of like waking up. One of the analogies I see used all over the community, and I love the analogy, is the movie The Matrix, when Neo takes the pill and he wakes up to a new way of looking at reality. And a lot of people think of a spiritual awakening as being woo woo or being, sunshine and rainbows and everything's beautiful. And that's part of a spiritual awakening. And one of the later videos, we're actually going to go through the stages of a spiritual awakening. And that is one of the stages of this kind of blissful state of everything being beautiful and sunshine. But it's not always that way. For me, it was a very dark spiritual awakening. It went through a very dark period because I had a lot of deep emotional wounds that had to be healed in order to realize that blissful state in my own life. And I did go through a blissful period of time, but then I had to go into this darkness and go through that. So we're going to talk about some of those things in some of our later videos, but kind of the first sign of if you're going through a spiritual awakening is understanding and recognizing synchronicities and realizing that there's no such thing as luck. There's no such thing as coincidences. It's just synchronistic events that happen in the universe. Everything starts happening for a reason and everything starts lining up. So maybe when you start having something, you're going to start seeing signs that recognize. You're going to start recognizing signs and things going on around you. And it's really easy for people, and people that are even not into the awakening will start seeing synchronicities before even going through an awakening. And I did, but we'll see those in the things that are going our way. We'll start seeing synchronicities in the things that go the way our ego-based mind wants us to see it. But when we start going through a spiritual awakening, we'll start even seeing synchronicities in the things that don't go our way. We'll start seeing synchronicities in the things that create turmoil in our lives. And when you start seeing the synchronicities in that, then you start getting into a flow where you're able to manage those things in a better way as you learn, as you grow. One of the signs, the second sign of the spiritual awakening is a bigger view of the big picture of our place in reality and what reality looks like. It changes our perspective of reality and get a bigger, broader view of the big picture and how we fit into that picture. And it's really kind of humbling to recognize that the world does not center the way we think it does. And that even as a humanity and as a culture, for me, it was not just awareness of my place as a human being, but just in the universe as a whole, and how small of an impact I have in the greater scheme of things. But yet at the same time, realizing that I am a necessary part of that grand scheme of things, and that I have a role to play in that big picture. And if I don't play my role, then other people and others on this planet, not just people, don't get to fulfill their destiny if I don't play my part, if I don't play my role the way I'm supposed to. And so you get this broader perspective of the big picture. As you change that perspective, it changes the way you look at the world around you. So that's the second sign of a spiritual awakening. We also, and it's part of understanding that bigger picture, these kind of go together, which is recognition of our consciousness outside of the ego. I talk a lot about the ego, and the ego is that part of ourselves that thinks that we are this body, that we are our achievements, that we are this person. And when we start expanding our consciousness, the spiritual awakening is about expanding our consciousness outside of the ego and outside of the self that we believe that we are. And when we start having that expansion, that's when we can start seeing the bigger picture, and we can start seeing the energy and recognizing that everything is a flow of energy in us and around us. Everything that we think we lack, it's just flow of energy around us. And that we have this ability then to work within that flow of energy. and we can work with that energy or work against it. When we work against it is when we experience lack and when we experience difficulty. And when we start working with that flow of energy is when we start finding alignment with ourselves. We start finding alignment with universal laws and universal principles, and we're able to then, I don't want to say control, because we really don't have control, but we do have more of a sense of uh, alignment and flow with it. And then things can flow more naturally and easily to us and for us in our lives. And we still face difficulties. We still face resistance as long as we're in this world, but we face least resistance, and we're able to manage that resistance as we do our healing work, as we continue our own growth and expansion. So the next one is sensitivity to energy. There's a lot of talk in spiritual circles about psychic abilities, and really all psychic abilities, there are some people that have this kind of elitism idea of psychic abilities. They think, oh, it's a chosen few, and that's not true. We all have psychic abilities. Every single person on this planet has psychic abilities. Some people can tap into those easier than others, and some people learn how to tap into them consciously, and some people don't. Some people are bought into the societal rules that say that these abilities are not real, or that they're evil, or that they're bad, and those kind of beliefs will create blocks to keep you from connecting with them. But we all have them, and there's different types of psychic abilities. It's like, okay, I'm a carpenter, okay, but I can do some general carpentry, and I can do some rough carpentry generally, but I'm a cabinet maker and a furniture maker. And I can do some very fine detail work in those things. But I spent a lot of time developing those skills and working on those. Now I can do general rough carpentry, building a house from scratch. I can do all that stuff, but I can't do it as well as somebody that does that stuff all the time. But I can do a really good job at building a piece of furniture, because I've developed those skills. I've spent a lot of time, and I have a natural talent for doing those kind of skills. The same thing is true with psychic abilities. We have different types of psychic abilities, and some people can connect with all of them in a very general sense, and some people can do specific ones better than others. So I'm very empathic. I can feel emotional energies around me. I can feel the flow of energies around me. Sometimes I can see those flows of energy, but mostly it's feeling them. And some of that is emotional energy, but sometimes it's just a flow of energy. And it's something that I've known for a really long time in my life, but I didn't understand it. And I was, quite frankly, scared of it for most of my life, because I didn't understand it. And I didn't have anybody there to teach me how to harness that and how to work with it. And it caused a lot of conflict and chaos in my life, because I wasn't controlling it and I didn't know how to. And so it controlled me more than me controlling it. And because of that, it caused a lot of chaos and havoc in my life. It caused a lot of anxiety in my life, because I didn't understand what was going on for a long time. But we all have it. Every single person on this planet has it. It's just some people can tap into it easier, and some people are living in denial of the abilities that they have naturally. So that's one of those keys. We become more sensitive to these flows of energy, because that's all psychic abilities are, is how we connect to the flows of energy that are going on around us. And sometimes we can tap into the collective consciousness of all of humanity, the collective consciousness of the planet. Some people can tap into channeling, where they can channel spirit energies or energies of spirit into the world. Different people connect with different abilities at different levels. Some of us have multiple abilities, and some of us have one or two that we are really proficient at being able to tap into. Some of it requires training, but some of it's some natural talent. For example, I could go out in the yard and put up a basketball hoop, and I could shoot hoops all day long. I have some natural, I have the ability to do that. I'm never going to play in the NBA. I'm never going to be at the level of Michael Jordan and being able to do what he did on the basketball field, but I could go out and throw hoops. And the same thing is true with a lot of these psychic abilities. Everybody has some ability to go out and do it, but some people are going to be more proficient, have some natural talent, and develop those skills to a degree where they can really, really do it really well and do it all the time. A lot of it too comes down to practicing those skills. It's a set of skills as well as natural talent. And just like a basketball player has to practice basketball all the time to be really good, the NBA players don't just show up on game day. They practice all the time, practicing and honing their skills. And it's the same, it's true. You have to practice these skills in order to learn them, in order to become proficient at them. You have to learn how to connect with them and practice them over and over again. So that's the fourth one, is higher sensitivity and awareness of these abilities. And then the desire for meaning becomes more important than the desire for achievements. This is like the fifth sign of a spiritual awakening to me, is that people that have gone through a spiritual awakening, the meaning behind what they do is more important than the actual achievement. In other words, for me, I talk all the time, creating this content is more important to me than the results I get from the content. Yes, those results are necessary in the physical world for me to be able to do some of the things that I want to do, to grow, to expand. I would love to reach more people. I would love to be able, but the meaning behind what I'm doing is more important. The ability to serve others is more important than what I get out of it. And this is one of the most important parts of that spiritual awakening, is recognizing that the meaning in our lives and finding a sense of meaning and purpose in our lives is way more important than having achievements. And then recognizing that the meaning of my life is more important to me, because the meaning of my life will live on beyond me. That will outlive me, whether my name is attached to it or not. What I bring into the world and how I serve the world will live on past me through other people. It may be a handful of people that I touch, and it may be massive numbers of people that I touch. But my meaning that I give to the meaning that is derived from my life is way more important than any achievements that I personally receive. It could be my identity doesn't come from my achievements. My identity doesn't come from the things that I have or accumulate in my life. It comes from the meaning and the purpose driven behind my life. The purpose of, was I in alignment with spiritual principles? Did I live my life in alignment with serving other people? That's more important than what I get out of it. So, because I can't take any of that stuff with me. I know eventually my time is going to come, and it might come today. It might come tomorrow. It might be in 100 years from now. We never know how much time we have. We know we have a finite set amount of time. I personally believe that we have a finite set amount of time when we're born to be here, but we are not given the information of what that timeline is. Spirit knows when your time's up, when your timeline's going to be up, but you don't. And most people don't. Some people get kind of an idea of when that's going to come. And I've seen that. I've seen people that actually named the date and time of when they were going to pass away. And it sometimes creates conflict with people that don't have those levels of awareness. But most people don't. Most people, and I've had people that have told me, I had a friend of mine, a really, really good friend of mine, that told me probably about 15 years ago when he was going to die. And that time passed earlier this year, and he's still around. So I think some of that changes too with time. When you get the closer you get to it, the more that can change, because as you're further away and you're looking at things, that's one of the things called precognition. And the thing with precognition is Precognition is based on your current moment energy, where you're at that time in your life, and precognitive abilities will be more accurate the closer you are to them. But I know people that have, like, within days or months, known that they were going to pass away, or known that other people were going to pass away, and have that ability. I know people that have those kind of abilities. How you use it and the meaning you give to it is way more important than the ability itself. What you do with that kind of knowing is way more important than what you do with it. So these are just some of the ideas that we've had about a spiritual awakening and what you can do as you're going through this awakening process. So if you've gone through these things, just kind of jot down, how do you feel about this? Do you feel that sensitivity to the energy? Are you having a greater sense of awareness of your place in the world? If so, then there's a good chance you've been through a spiritual awakening. Now, the spiritual awakening is not easy. It's not an easy process at all. And so one of the things that we have to talk about is that there's stages of a spiritual awakening process. And as we get into the spiritual awakening, we have to understand that there's a evolution, and that process is an ever growing, ever recycling process. In other words, once you go through an awakening, it's not an event, it's a process. There's a finite, what we call the awakening moment is really when we start the process, but the process never ends. It constantly goes and will continue until the day you die. There is no end to an awakening, because we're constantly growing, we're constantly expanding, and we're constantly learning and becoming more in our place within the universe. So as we get into this, one of the things that I found is we have the blissful state, the joyous state. And this is kind of where a lot of people start, but not everyone. But you'll just kind of, there's this stage that you kind of get into. They're not linear, by the way. They come at different times, different places. Sometimes they overlap each other, but you get into this stage of joy and bliss, and everything is beautiful with the world. I went through this in 2005 when I went through my original spiritual awakening. One, it was an expansion of consciousness, but on an energetic level, for people that understand how energies work and maybe are experiencing the energies, we have 7 energy centers called the chakras within our body. And what we call the spiritual awakening is really the opening, is that first opening of your heart chakra, where your heart chakra goes from being closed to being opened up for the first time in your lifetime. And different people experience this at different stages in their life. A lot of times people experience this through their Saturn return in astrology, which happens when you're about 29 and a half years old. And that return can last up to 2 years. Mine, I experienced mine when I was about 30, going between 30 and 31. It was at the end of my Saturn return. And that 2.5 year period of time in my life was extremely chaotic and tumultuous. I went through finding my wife cheating on me at the time, going through a divorce, going through a change. I moved across the country and moved from Texas to Orlando, Florida. I met a new group of teachers. I walked away from the spiritual group I was working with at the time, and I went through the spiritual awakening. I went through a rebirth. Literally, I went through a spiritual ceremony that was a rebirthing and a renewal of my life. And all of this happened right between 29 and 31 years old. And it was extremely challenging and tumultuous time, but I went through this period of just bliss. Nothing could get me down. Nothing could I was just like, everything is right with the world. I even had a period where I wasn't working. I wasn't bringing in any money, and I didn't care. I was just like blissfully unaware, but it was ungrounded. It was just very high flying and fancy ideas, but it was ungrounded in uncentered and unrealistic kind of ideas going through my head all the time. And then as I started getting myself more centered, I really started getting into a lot of trauma from my own lifetime. I also started remembering previous lifetimes. And some people do that. Some people have past life regressions where they start remembering previous lifetimes. I did during my spiritual awakening, which led me into this really deep dark night of the soul, diving really deep into what we call the shadow self. And I spent a long time in that shadow self where I went through this really long, drawn out, dark period in my life. And I was not a nice person. And a lot of people see me now, and a lot of people see the part of me that I put out here on YouTube, and they see me as being nice and caring and compassionate, and I try to be those things. But I went through this long period of time where I have to admit I wasn't. I was a very nasty person to be around, and a lot of people didn't like to be around me. I lost a lot of good friends during that period. I lost a lot of people that were really close to me, but I also went through a lot of healing work that I had to go through. I went through depression. I went through a lot of rage and anger. Um, and I went through a lot of really difficult stuff. And it's hard for me to share some of that because I try to be compassionate and nice and caring towards people and treating other people the way I want to be treated. But during that dark night of the soul period in my life, I wasn't always doing that. And I wasn't even that way with people in my own family, people in my friends. Um, and it was a extremely difficult time, and a lot of guilt and shame, and a lot of that being blaming other people for my guilt and shame instead of taking responsibility for myself. So there was this really long, drawn out, dark period in my life that took me several years, and I met people. I got into relationships with people that had a huge impact on what I'm doing now and where I'm at now. But at the time, I was in such a dark place, I wasn't able to understand the meaning in those relationships. And I lost them. I lost people that are still to this day very dear to me, even though I don't see them and I've had no contact with them for over 10 years. There's still people that were very instrumental in the growth I've had now because they taught me lessons that I wasn't ready for then, but that I'm now integrating and understanding in my own life. But so we go through this kind of dark night of the soul, and then we kind of have this area that's, I just call it the blankness. It was just like this period in my life where I had already started learning to connect with spirit guides and connect with energies and doing energy healing work, and I was working on things within myself, but I kind of entered this stage where it was just blank. And it's like, no matter how much I meditated, no matter how much I tried to do all this energy work, and I thought, something's wrong with me. I've screwed up myself somewhere along the way because I can't connect with those things. I can't hear them anymore. I can't see them anymore. I can't talk to them anymore. And I was really disconnected from the divine source. And I came to realize now that it was kind of like a resting place where I was doing a lot of internal work within myself that was very individual. And it was kind of a time for clearing clutter out of my own life. And I disconnected spiritually. Not really a disconnection. It wasn't a true disconnection. You're always connected spiritually, but it was more of an illusion of disconnection, if that makes sense. And as I went through that disconnected phase, I disconnected not only spiritually, I disconnected physically. I disconnected from relationships. I disconnected from other people. And I withdrew a lot into myself. And this period lasted me for a couple of years. Some people go through it briefly. Some people go through it and then they go back into a dark night of the soul, and then they go through this disconnection, and then they go back into a dark night of the soul. And sometimes they go through this disconnected state, but they're also in this disconnected state and still getting into that blissful state. So again, like, these things don't work linearly. They like recycle over and over and go through different stages at different times. What really got me out of it was actually some stuff on YouTube, and I started seeing some videos about the spiritual process and this awakening process and started learning about it. And then I started recognizing where I was at in my own processes and what I had been going through all these years. And so I started learning about grounding. And as I started getting myself grounded, that helped pull me out of that void state, pulled me out of the depression. It pulled me out of that dark night, that dark phase in my life, and helped me on this spiritual path. And this is where I've been really at for the last year and a half, is really grounding myself in reality, still having this kind of more blissful state, becoming more in tune with my own inner being, getting back into my own spiritual walk and spiritual practices, and getting out of that void state. But it's also getting me very grounded in how I'm approaching life now, very grounded in how I'm approaching myself and other people and my relationships and my ability to serve other people, and really grounded and connected with the earth energy as well as with all the other energies going on around me. And because I'm getting more grounded, I'm also having even more expansion of awareness into my own abilities and into who I am as a person. And I'm still growing, I'm still learning, I'm still on this journey myself. But this is where we're at in that journey. And this is where we are getting more grounded and getting into that fully solid state of knowing who I am and where I'm at in this process. And then I've had some moments, even as I've gone through this journey, where I get through some expansion, and then I have to kind of process it. I go back in deeper into the dark night of the soul, still doing a lot of that inner healing work. The thing is, as long as we still have shadows within ourselves, we still have dark nights of the soul. So we're going to still have those transformative experiences. We're going to have even more awakening moments where we continue to awaken, we continue to expand, we continue to grow. And I'm going to have even more and more. I went through some more just this week. I went back into a dark night of the soul, back through the void, back into being grounded, all within the last week. And it's interesting because now when you're more conscious of it, now that's one of the things, part of why I'm doing some of the content and sharing some of these ideas. Once you become conscious of these things, you can actually work your way through them faster and easier. I went through such a long period of going through that first dark night of the soul because I didn't have any awareness of what was going on. I thought I was going crazy. There was times when I thought I was going to get locked up because I was losing my mind because of how things were going. And I came close. I think I came close to a breaking point where I think my mind could have broken, and I was like pushed to the very edge of what I could handle. But they always say, that which doesn't kill you make you stronger. I have to agree and disagree with that, because those things were weakening me until I did the healing work. Once you do the healing work from those wounds, that's when you can become stronger. You have to do the healing work. You have to be willing to put forth the effort to do your own healing. So much of what I talk about is healing traumas, healing wounds from your past lifetimes, everything. A lot of my lifetime this time has been about karma. It's about dealing with mistakes I've made in the previous lifetimes, and paying the price for some of those mistakes, and healing those wounds from previous lifetimes that my soul has carried through all these lifetimes. That's part of what I'm on as part of this awakening journey, is recognizing that and healing those karmic wounds and letting go and having karmic relationships with people so that you can heal the wounds from those relationships, and then letting those go when they're done. That's one of the things, is when we get in, recognize a karmic relationship, we really need to focus on, okay, why am I in this karmic relationship? Let's do the healing work of this relationship, and then let it go and move on to something different, to something better. Otherwise, you continue reliving that cycle over and over and over again. When you have cycles of things that continue repeating, because there's a lesson in that cycle that you still haven't learned yet. And we have to relearn that lesson. We have to really understand and find what that lesson is. And sometimes we get it and sometimes we don't. And it's okay. Learning self-acceptance of where you're at in your journey is one of the most important things you can do if you're struggling with your spiritual awakening. Acceptance of yourself. I started this channel talking about the Serenity Prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. And so many people are living their life trying to change things from their past, trying to change mistakes that they've made, trying to change things that they have no control over, trying to change their circumstances, when their circumstances are just a direct result of their previous past actions. You can't change the past, so you can't change the present moment circumstances. But you can change the future circumstances by choosing a different path now, by choosing different choices now, by making more conscious and choices and finding better alignment with your spirit and with your soul. You can make better choices that will lead you down a different path and change the direction that your life is going. This is really where our power to change our lives, to control our lives, to find peace within ourselves comes from. So hope that these are helpful to understanding what the spiritual awakening is, defining where you're at in your spiritual awakening process. If you want to know more, leave me a comment. If you have more questions about the spiritual awakening, make sure you leave us a comment down below. And you can follow us all around the web on Facebook, here on YouTube, on Instagram, TikTok, and on Twitter. And we will be sharing more ideas all around as we continue our journey. Thank you guys so much for joining us today. Y'all have a fantastic day, and we'll see you next time.